Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. My name is Gonzii and today we are going to be reacting to an infographic show video, man. This time called Why Jack the Ripper Was Never Caught. Now, you guys, if you know me, know that I love serial killer content. I think it's fascinating, but the most fascinating stuff about some of the serial killers like the Zodiac and Jack the Ripper is they were never caught. So we know Zodiac Killer wasn't caught because the police were dum-dums. So let's see why Jack the Ripper was never caught. So without further ado, let's go.
It's the dead of night on the mean streets of London's impoverished East End. On one particular street, a man's horse suddenly rears up while pulling a cart. Something's frightened it. The guy then lights a match and makes a grisly discovery: the body of a woman with her throat sliced from ear to ear. What this man doesn't know is Jack the Ripper is hiding right next to him in the shadows. If he pricked his ears, he'd probably hear the Ripper's labored breathing.
Oh, this is like the third victim, I believe.
The Ripper should have been seen that night.
He got killed in an alleyway, and
in fact, as you'll see in the show,
literally hiding 2 feet away from the dude that found the body.
That
in the shallows hiding.
We're going to come back to him and explain just how close he was to catching the Ripper. But first, let's give you a small introduction to possibly the world's most famous serial killer.
Yes, without a shadow of a doubt.
To catch the man was
everybody knows who Jack the Ripper is.
In the 1880s were a giant labyrinth that were hardly well lit. Some of the slum areas were ripe for murder at night, seeing that prostitutes wandered around by themselves in the dark looking for gin-addicted clients. The area of Whitechapel, where the Ripper committed his ghastly crimes, was heaving in those days, with people living in abject poverty. When folks couldn't get any work, some of them turned to crime. Many of the women turned to what's sometimes called the oldest trade in the world. In fact, in 1880, there were a total of 62 brothels and 1,200 prostitutes in this area alone.
Wow,
some of these women lived in
that
lodging
area.
houses. These were about the cheapest places you could live. Some of the rooms even had a rope you could lean on as a form of bed. This was where we get the term hangover, because people would literally hang over a rope. The rope cost 2 pence a night, and while uncomfortable, it was better than the street and all the dangers that lurked there.
Jesus.
This was a kind of place where
Only
Jack the
in
Ripper
London,
made his name.
yeah.
It was a cauldron of
Bro,
violence, vice, racism, and some say immorality. In other words, it was an ideal place to kill people because the police can sometimes be less than caring about the victims of this so-called lower class. But once the Ripper got going, he was hard to
What are the many reasons why he was
because of
never
the
caught?
extreme nature of his crimes. It's thought he
If
killed
instead
5
of
people for sure,
prostitutes,
called the canonical
high-ranking
5, but he
women
might
were
have murdered
killed,
as
he would
many
have
as
been
11.
caught in like
For instance,
a
no
week
one's
or
certain
so.
if he killed Emma Elizabeth Smith. She'd fallen on hard times and became a prostitute, with a detective later writing about her. There was something about Emma Smith which suggested that there had been a time when the comforts of life had not been denied to her. There was a touch of culture in her speech, unusual in her class. In the wee hours of April 3, 1888, she was savagely attacked. She didn't die instantly, but went into a coma and died shortly after.
Damn.
Was this the work of the Ripper? It's hard to know.
Oh
She
yeah,
wasn't
because
mutilated
you have the
like many of
canonical
later
5,
victims, but
and
her
then you have a
injuries were
bunch of
horrifying
others that
nonetheless.
he's
Then there
suspected
was
of
Martha
committing
Cameron,
as
an
well.
alcoholic who had a reputation for staying out all night
But
and causing general havoc.
the mainstream
On August
idea
6,
is the canonical
1888, she
5
and some
he
other women
therefore
went to the
killed.
Angel and Crown
Definitely.
Pub, and as the expression goes, got
The
hammered.
others,
She was
we
later
don't
found
know,
dead,
sadly.
again with horrifying injuries. Those included being stabbed in her heart and lungs. The killer also stabbed her 9 times in the throat. The term
Fucking hell.
overkill was suitable here, with 39 stab wounds to
Hey,
the body in
yo!
total. Detective Edmund Reed was on the case. A mysterious
Jesus,
man had
that's a
been
criminal
seen that night
passion
close to where
almost.
the victim was found, so he put a bunch of men in the lineup.
39
Nothing
stab
came of
wounds.
it. There's a slim chance it could have been the work of the Ripper, and if it was, he was close to being caught that night, although he came a hell of a lot closer, as you'll soon see. One of the reasons this woman is said to have been the victim of possibly a different killer is the fact that she wasn't skillfully mutilated, and she hadn't been eviscerated. The murder weapon used to kill her was also cruder than the one the Ripper used. Now we come to the first victim, who is included in the canonical 5. She was Mary Ann Nichols, known as Polly to her friends. She was killed August 31st that same year. Yeah, that is a short time after the last murder, but as we said, those London slums were terrible places to live back then, so it's possible there were a few men who killed women in the East End in those months. The MOs might have been similar to the murders, but the Ripper had quite a unique signature. That's why you're watching the video about it right now. It was his method of killing that made headlines all over the world, not just the fact that he killed. Killers were to a penny, but skilled mutilators were not. Polly also had a tough life, at times getting money from rent, by working in one of London's brutal workhouses, and other times by selling her body. On the night of August 30th, she went to the Frying Pan pub and had some drinks. It seems she might have spent all her cash, because later she was chucked out of her lodging house for not being able to pay the rent. She looked at the landlord that night and said, "I'll soon get my DOS money. See what a jolly bonnet I've got now." Maybe she thought her new bonnet would help her find a client or two, and so she'd have a bed that night. Early in the morning, she was seen staggering around drunk as hell. Slurring her words, she said to an acquaintance, "I've had my lodging money 3 times today and I've spent it." Those were the last words anyone ever heard from Polly. Charles Allen Cross was the man that found her body at 3:40 a.m. What's amazing is that when Cross found her, she'd likely only been dead for about 10 minutes. The Ripper couldn't have gotten far in that time. In fact, cops interrogated 3 horse slaughterers. They were Harry Tompkins, James Munford, and Charles Britton. They'd been close to the scene of the crime when it happened. As we said, the killer had to be nearby. Someone had to have seen something. The cops were also taken aback by the sheer brutality of the murder. The woman had not only had her throat.
I've seen this documentary by Lemino, which is an hour and a half long. It's incredible. Go watch it if you love the serial killer type stuff in long videos. And one of the victims, I don't remember if this one, I think it's the 3rd victim in that alleyway. They heard screaming, like loud screaming, like 2 o'clock at night, and nobody went to check. Now that tells me 2 things. One, that was a normal thing. That was a normal occurrence. That in London you would just at 3 in the morning you just hear a woman scream, and that was normal. Or nobody bothered to go check. Go check on the peoples,
But her
mate.
abdomen had been mutilated, so much so her insides
I think
were
it's more
spilling
likely
out.
to be the
a
first
6 to
one.
8-inch knife had been used, possibly a shoemaker's
I
knife,
think
and it seemed to
this
medical
is more
experts that some
terrifying than
anatomical
anything.
skill had been employed in
And
the
what
murder.
is gone?
There were
Just
so
got
many
it though.
injuries to Polly that the police determined that the killer must have been working on her for a full 5 minutes, and this was out in the open. Also, on his escape, the killer would have had some blood on him. Was this man invisible or something? Surely someone had to have seen something.
It seemed like it.
Investigation, this
Rose
is what
covered in
considered
blood,
fact.
and
It
nobody
seems
found them.
astonishing at first thought that the culprit should have escaped detection, for
How
there
would he
must
do that?
surely have
Using
been
an
marks of
apron,
blood about
maybe?
this person. Still, he said that with there being so many
Change of
slaughterhouses in the area,
clothes?
a man had been walking around with blood-stained clothes. Maybe onlookers would have thought nothing of it. Now, there had been 3 brutal murders, although police couldn't say if they'd been committed by the same person. It was at this time that London's infamous press got to work, which fomented chaos in the city. Nowhere seemed safe. Then on
London
September
does
8th,
love
there was
the
a grisly
press that
discovery
cements
of Annie
chaos.
Chapman.
That's the
Her
truth
life
of
was
it.
also a tale of woe. She had a problem with booze, which worsened after her daughter died, and she had to place her disabled son in care. Then her husband split with her and took the last child, and she ended up living in one of those run-down Whitechapel lodging houses. After her husband died from his alcoholism, the little bit of cash he sent her was gone. She made money by doing odd jobs after that, but also prostituted herself when things got desperate. At 5:15 a.m. that morning, a man heard a woman scream when he was walking along Hanbury
See what I
Street.
mean?
He didn't bother to investigate, and so yet again, the Ripper could have been caught
See
if
what
things
I
had been a
mean,
little
bro?
different.
He didn't
was found
bother.
at 6 a.m.
Hear a
nearby
woman
and
screaming,
hadn't
and you
been
don't
dead
even
long.
bother to
This
check
is
what it
one of
is.
the doctor said in his report. The instrument used at the throat and abdomen was the same. It must have been a very sharp knife with a thin, narrow blade, and must have been at least 6 to 8 inches in length, probably longer. The injuries could have been done by such an instrument as a medical man used for post-mortem purposes. Those injuries matched the ones on Polly, with experts saying the killer must have had some anatomical knowledge due to the fact that in one
He clearly
movement,
had that.
he'd taken out her reproductive organs.
Clearly.
The press went crazy, making up stories that some guy nicknamed Leather Apron might have been to blame.
Like,
one report said,
he
"Whatever
would leave
information
the
may be in
intestines of the
possession
victims
police,
over the
they deem it
right
necessary to
shoulder,
keep
I
secret."
believe it
It's
was.
believed their attention
Yeah.
is particularly
it
directed to a
was
notorious character known as
precise
Leather
as
Apron.
well.
A man named John Pizer was
Almost
arrested
like he
and
was a
interrogated.
surgeon of some
He was
kind.
known as Leather Apron, and he had a history of violence, but in the end, he proved his innocence and even claimed some compensation from the newspapers that named and shamed him. It might not have been him, but whoever it was had committed the crime in a fairly busy area. Yet again, it seemed the culprit had a mask of invisibility, but in the next murder, he
Almost
might
like
have
hiding in
basically done
plain
the deed
sight,
right under
almost is
someone's
better
nose. Louis
than just
Daimschutz had spent the day of
trying,
September
like, if you-
29th
I don't
selling
know.
his cheap jewelry.
It's so
At the
weird
end of
how
the day,
he
feeling
was
tired,
never
he took his
even
horse and cart
seen
back
by
to Dunsfold
anyone.
Yard.
That's
Little did he
That's the thing about Jack the Ripper that people don't talk about enough. All of the eyewitnesses of Jack the Ripper are extremely vague. Extremely vague. I think it was the 5th victim of the canonical 5. A man was coming down the road, and she saw the victim, the lady that was killed, talking to a dude. Then he followed them, and they went into her apartment, and she was found dead there. But the dude never saw his face. He was always with his back turned to him. He never saw his face. How many stars have to align there for it to be a serial killer, and all of the witnesses that could possibly see you are even 2 feet away from you and you are hiding in the shadows waiting for them to go away, or you are with your back turned to the only witness in sight that sees you go into the victim's house where she was found dead a few hours later. It's so wild to think about. I think about this stuff a lot, as you can
as
say.
he approached the
As
yard,
you can
the
see,
Ripper was
because
mutilating a woman named Elizabeth
it's
Stride.
crazy.
Again, her life was full
How?
of tragedy.
Bro was
A
covered in
story
blood.
including
Nobody
dying
found it
children
once.
and a dead
It
husband.
mad.
Her misfortune led to her working as a prostitute, or at least on the days she couldn't afford to pay for her room in the slum.
Crazy.
Stride had been spotted about
Ew.
11 p.m. that
Wow.
night with a man wearing a bowler hat. He was also said to have been well-dressed and sported a rather fetching black mustache. We may never know if he was the Ripper. At around 12:45 a.m., she was seen again with a man who was well-dressed. This was just after a policeman had seen her with a man wearing a hat, although he didn't describe it as being a bowler hat. Whoever the man was, Stride had apparently said to him, "No, not tonight, some other night." Just before 1 a.m., she was seen by at least 2 other people, and both times she was with the man. The Ripper was certainly a brazen killer, knowing he'd been seen with Stride, but he still carried the act through to its bloody end. It was at 1 a.m. when Dimeschutz's horse could be heard clip-clopping down the street. He later explained, "I left home about 11:30 in the morning and returned home at exactly 1 a.m. Sunday morning. I noticed the time at the tobacco shop in the commercial road. I was driving a pony harnessed to a costermonger's barrow. It was as he entered the yard that his pony stopped in its tracks, as if startled by something. Dimeschutz thought he could see something in the way, but with it being so dark, he had no idea what it was. That's when he pulled out some matches. Now, with the glow of the match, he pulled out his whip and nudged whatever it was on the floor. It was then that he realized it was a body, and noticing a dress, he knew it was a woman. What he didn't know was that she'd only just been killed. He actually thought at one point the body might be his wife. This was the East End. Coming across a passed-out person in the street who'd had one too many drinks was not unusual at all. Dimeschutz said so much in his statement, which read in part, "I took no further notice of it, but went into the club and asked where my missus was. I found her in the front room on the ground floor. I left the pony in the yard by itself just outside the club door. My wife was with several of the members of the club. I told them there's a woman lying in the yard, but I cannot say whether she is drunk or dead."
The
He
woman's just
subsequently left the scene,
lying
got himself a
outside of
candle,
the
and then
club.
returned to the body. It was then that he noticed all
And
the blood.
dude just
He then
goes
ran
in,
through the streets
"Yeah,
looking for
she might be
policemen,
drunk or
unable
dead,
to
I don't
find
know."
one. He returned to the body with another man, not one to understand
And
much
yeah,
about
he was.
contamination.
This is the second instance that he's in a alleyway, trapped. He cannot leave. This particular case, I was talking about the other victim. On this one, he's hiding behind a wall. The only exit is where people come in. He cannot leave this area. So he killed this woman, heard the horse come by, run away. He is hiding in a alleyway, a street a bit, and he has to wait there. And when the dude goes inside the bar, yeah, that's when he runs away. It's
Crime scene, he
ridiculous.
lifted up the woman's body.
How?
He saw that her throat had been cut from ear to ear. The actual autopsy report stated that Stride had not long before her death consumed some cheese and
How?
potatoes. It also said there was a clear-cut incision on the neck. It was 6 inches in length and commenced 2.5 inches in a straight line below the angle of the
Jesus.
jaw, 3/4 of an inch over an undivided muscle, and then becoming deeper,
Again,
dividing
not
the
how to
sheath.
use a
The
knife.
cut was very clean and
He
deviated.
was some
from
kind
the
of a
downwards.
doctor, man.
The
He
arteries
has
and
to
other
be,
vessels
because
contained in the sheath were all cut through.
in the dark.
This time, though, he didn't
Do
remove
all
any
of those
organs.
cuts and
Maybe he
incisions
didn't
with
have time.
precision as
Several
well.
families lived in the area. Then even more
Mental.
people came forward and said they'd seen Stride either talking or arguing with a man. Another person said the man had a mustache. Not only that, but the International Working Men's Educational Club, where Dimeschutz was a steward, was full of people singing and dancing. This place was right next to where the murder had taken place. Had they not been singing, people would have surely heard Stride's screams
That's
through a
true.
window that was open. That's debatable though, seeing as the
Still.
Ripper might have made his cut before she had a
Think-
chance to scream.
think
If
you would
did
still
commit
hear
this
it,
murder,
though.
He surely had a busy night. That's because about 45 minutes later, not too far away, he killed Catherine Eddowes.
Yes.
She had been slashed over the face and had her throat cut. The autopsy report
That
said
one is
the
bad.
peritoneal lining
That
was
one
cut
is
through on
bad.
the left side and the left kidney
Which makes you
carefully
think
taken out
he
and
got
removed. I
stopped.
believe the perpetrator of the act
The
must
dude
have had
came in, he
considerable
didn't
knowledge of
finish the
position
job,
of the organs
and then he
in the
went
abdominal
45
cavity
minutes down the
and
street
the way
and
of
killed
removing
another
them.
woman.
Still, it's long
Wow,
been disputed
stuff.
if such work required
That
the
one is
skill
the
of
most
surgeon.
gruesome out
Some
of all
thought
of them.
no, but the killer might have worked as a butcher. It
Maybe.
was certain that all those mutilations might have taken around 5 minutes. Another doctor testified that when he arrived at the scene, she'd only been dead for about 40 minutes. It should be said in those days that was a lot of guesswork as compared to now, but still doctors had a fairly good idea about the time of death in such cases. So the Ripper had committed 2 murders in a short space of time. He might have rushed the first one, seeing that he basically did it right under people's noses. Even with the second one, he could easily have been seen. That's when the killer really started to push his luck. He either began a correspondence with the police and press, or someone was playing a hoax. After these murders, a postcard was sent to the cops, and so was the famous From Hell letter, accompanied with a kidney. Part of the letter read, "I send you half the kidney I took from one woman, preserved it for you. The other piece I fried and ate, it was very nice. I may send you the bloody knife that took it out if you only wait a while longer. Signed, catch me when you can." It might have been a hoax, but at the same time, those missives made Jack the Ripper case explode in the global media. As you know, there were only 2 more canonical victims, and there were perhaps some more victims too, but the Ripper really should have been caught the night he committed the double murder. As Dimeshoots later said, the Ripper must have committed the act only seconds before he arrived on the scene. He wrote, "It would have been quite possible for a man to have escaped from the yard while I was driving up to the club door, but after I had told the members what I had seen, nobody, I think, could have escaped." The cops speculated that the Ripper must have seen Dimeshoots approaching, and that's when he took evasive action. In fact, they said that when Dimeshoots lit that match, it's very likely the Ripper was standing nearby in the shadows. It must have been when Dimeshoots went to get that candle that he made the escape. Think about it, if Dimeshoots hadn't gone to get the candle and instead shouted something, all those people in the club would have come out and likely discovered the killer. The Ripper wouldn't have killed again, and the case would have quickly been written off as just another set of gruesome events in a place where people were used to that kind of thing. Now, you need to know more about Jack and what—
Mental stuff, bro. Yeah, man, he should have been caught that day. That day when he does the double murder should have been the day that they caught Jack the Ripper. He killed the first lady. Bro hightails, he's going up the street, yeah? Police are coming down the street to the murder site. While that's happening, he goes and kills another lady. And then he goes back again, apparently. That's because they found the second lady's, one piece of the second lady's apron close to the first murder. So, bro went on his journey, running away from the police like he was invisible, bro. It's mental stuff. Again, go watch Lemino's 1.5 hours documentary about Jack the Ripper. Is phenomenal. You're gonna absolutely love it if you guys enjoy this type of stuff. But yeah, guys, thank you so much for watching the video, man. Hope you guys enjoyed it as much as I did. Shout out Infographics show. But before you go, don't forget to views on the channel, man. Come on, bro. Keep God first as always. Drink water, go tell somebody you love them, and if you're here, I know what to do, man. Like the video, subscribe to the channel. My name is Gonzii, and see you guys tomorrow. Goodbye.